I believe it was the early 90s, and my father had driven me from Minneapolis to Detroit, where we were going to meet my father's side of the family. And, I'd met him before, and, I was just a young kid, and there was this cookout, and it was night, and we were just having this, this party, and everybody was eating, and we were playing games outdoors, and it was a lot of fun. And I remember a cousin of mine pulled me aside and said, "Whoa!" I was running really far down the block, and they said, "No, you keep it in over here." And I was like, "What you mean? I don't have to like abide by your rules. I can run around this block just like I can in Minneapolis." And they were like, "Nah, you don't do that." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "You ever heard of Vietnam War?" And they were being really, I mean, not flippant, but they were trying to communicate. This is an older person trying to communicate to a kid. And they're like, "You heard of the Vietnam War?" And I was like, yeah, I know what that is. And they were like, "It's like that. So we don't want to go too far and, get caught up in the war." And I was like, that's crazy. And I never understood that because in the mind of a child, I was like, well, I don't understand what community violence is and or survivalism, stratification, economic injustice, legacy of economic injustice. And later on, I would come into contact with that a lot throughout my teens. And going off to college, there wasn't a whole lot of that. It was just, college students getting rambunctious and trying to fight outside of parties and whatnot. But growing up in Minneapolis and seeing communal trauma and violence occur was one thing. And then recently experiencing that as well. The point I'm coming to is that for folks that live in communities that have experienced trauma, whether it be police brutality, gun violence, whatever it is, you have to understand that, and this is kind of in part with the last video that I did, but this is for communities that have experienced violence, whether it be police brutality or gun violence or whatever it is that there is something that happens to the space, undoubtedly. And I was talking to a few folks after a extremely traumatic event occurred 2 weeks ago, and I was right next to it, and it's changed my life forever. And I went back, and it was just, everything was different. Nothing felt resolved. Nothing felt normal, and the air was off, the gravity was off, the sky even seemed to be just absent. It was just an odd experience all around. And you just go back and you're thinking, what is going on here? Something's not right. And it's not like you shouldn't be there. It's just something that I can't apply words to just yet is off. And that my cousin back in that day was saying, it's like the Vietnam War. And to them, that was their way of explaining it. For me, my way of explaining it was, I need to sit down and talk with people. And so me and community members sat down and talked at the place of the traumatic event. And, this is primarily black folks sitting down and talking. And that was probably the most cathartic thing that I've been a part of in a long time in my adult life. Outside of therapy, was just sitting down and talking with folks and saying, how do you feel about this? Like, where are you at right now? And a lot of folks had experienced that in the past, and nobody really addressed that like that. Minneapolis is in a space of revolution, movement, and community building. And in that, this is like a once in a lifetime chance for a lot of folks to actually sit down in a room with community members and talk this out. Nobody's separated. Everybody's kind of together here. And the thing that I found just mind-blowing was how effective it was to sit down and speak to people and say, how did you feel about that? And then, they speak on it, and then you kind of speak on it, and it really, it's really something else to come together with folks and speak about the experience that you had with that and hear from other people what's helped them going forward. And the thing that was a little bit, disturbing was how often these things happen or how often violence happens in communities and nobody talks to anybody about it. Just don't. And maybe that's the way that some folks get by. However, I'm a big proponent of, I'm a big advocate of therapy and talking to somebody about what's going on. And this is just to address that when those things happen, when traumatic events happen in those spaces, I 1000% empathize with the feeling of it being like the Twilight Zone or like the Upside Down or something. I remember this podcast talked about two men, one white, one black. One grew up on the south side of Chicago. The other one was deployed to Afghanistan with the army, and they followed their lives, and up to the point that they're adults now in their 30s, and they both have PTSD. However, one is very recognizable. Oh, you went overseas and you fought a war and you came back. Of course you have PTSD. And the other one was, well, you grew up here in America. How could you not? How could you have PTSD? And it's because when you have impoverished, neglected, stratified zones, you have your own country that has waged war on poor cities, poor corners of the neighborhood, poor people, people experiencing houselessness. There's been a war waged on that, which in my mind is one of the saddest things in the world, and people suffer from that PTSD of it. And it's not to minimize folks who go overseas, it's to say that pain goes hand in hand. And that is absolutely something that those two men in that podcast could empathize with one another on that. And this is for folks that are coming up in those specific areas in the US that I see you, and you're going through the same thing. And I do hope that there's healing in your community, and I hope that everyone is able to speak with one another and bring about some catharsis going forward.